make the announcement that I know. Speak in your loud voice. Oh, we're good? Okay. Okay, I guess we'll, here's Michael. Okay, I'd like to call the work session of October 20th, 2021 on academics and the pandemic to order. Would everybody please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Sue?
Yes.
Yeah, we did, I had to flip the page. Could we please have a reiteration of the executive session motion?
The board met in executive session to discuss the employment history of a particular individual.
Perfect. Well, welcome everybody. This is our biggest, I don't want to say our biggest crowd because we've had bigger crowds, but our biggest contributing team to our work sessions. It's so great to look around. I look forward to meeting those of you and getting an introduction of those of you who I don't know yet. Thank you for taking the time out of what's already a long day to join us and to share all this important information. Just two very quick things. First of all, we have our second board coffee tomorrow at 9 o'clock at J Cafe. We had a great turnout for our first one. I hope that others will be able to join us. It's a great opportunity to engage with Dr. Champ and with the board. Secondly, we have so many people in the community who are interested in participating in our committee work, which is fantastic. We had over 90 applications. According to John, there was a moment in time in our community where you had to almost beg people to get involved on the committee. So 90 means we've got a lot of community engagement, which is wonderful. It's a long process to select, the right people to the committees, but we hope to have the process wrapped up by the end of the week, and that we will be in touch with the people who applied early next week, so that we can start beginning some of the committees which haven't met yet and wrap community members into them. Dr. Champ, you had a quick update, right?
Very quick as well. So thank you all for being here tonight. I'm really looking forward to hearing from everyone. We got a little sneak preview this past week, but our teachers were not able to be with us, so we know you're going to bring just incredible insight to the wisdom that was already shared by our administrators. So we're very much looking forward to it. Before we get started, I do want to recognize that it is School Board Recognition Week. So I just want to take a moment to thank the board, to share some certificates for our Board of Education volunteers who give so much of their time, as well as for each of you a framed ribbon cutting photo, one of the biggest events of the year. So I will pass these out. And while I do that, I'm actually going to pass it over to my colleague, Dr. Garcia, to kick off the main event of tonight.
First, we have to appoint a clerk pro tem. I'd like to take a motion to appoint Alex Wolf. Do I have a second? Second. Thanks, Sue. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Did he agree, by the way?
I just think he looks like the most fitting person for the job. You got the job.
So, thank you. So welcome, everyone. We also want to definitely thank all the teachers and administrators who are here this evening. It's very important for us to hear about your experiences, your perspectives, your thoughts, because it's really been an interesting 20 months since the pandemic started in March 2020. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about academics in the pandemic and basically what's been happening in our classrooms, with our kids, with the adults. And I think it's been a very long time since we actually had such a number of teachers or administrators gathered, probably 2018, in a work session this size, this in depth. So it's very exciting for us. And I said this last week, but I also said it to the teachers yesterday. This experience is as much a learning experience, really, for us to hear about what you have to say, but also to hear each other across the system. It's a great opportunity for the board and the community, but really, this is a professional learning experience for us, to kind of get a really first-hand account of the past 20 months and where we are and where we want to head into the future. So again, thank you for joining us. Just a quick introductions. I'm just going to talk about the people here and mention them by name. Our administrative team, we have Dr. Thompson, Director of Humanities, Dr. Callahan, Director of Math and Science, Mr. Sabalos, Director of Technology, Dr. Ribeiro, Supervisor of Special Education K-5. You have Mr. Laus, Supervisor of Special Education 6 through 12, Dr. Fitzgerald, Principal Hutchinson, Ms. Carr, Prospect Hill Principal, Ms. Sabia, Middle School Principal, Mr. Berkowitz, the High School Principal. And then our teachers, again, thank you for volunteering. It really wasn't hard to find teachers to do this, and really, you guys kind of stepped up to the plate and you said, hey, I want to share the story. I want to be part of that story. Kim Esfendis, Salmonary Special Education, Kara Weiss, Prospect Hill Special Education, Clara Cavalli, Colonial 2nd grade, Melody Casagrande, Hutchinson 4th grade, Kate Dembowski, Prospect Hill AIS, Janine Salman, Middle School Social Studies, Raquel Rodriguez, High School Math, and Garrett Johnson, High School Special Education and Science. So again, thank you for joining us. So if I jump back now, if you give me a second, to the beginning. So when we were talking over the summer about different work session topics, I definitely wanted to have an opportunity to share with the community and the board what's been happening in the classrooms, what's been our experience, because it's been a long haul. It's really been 20 months, and I want to thank my esteemed colleague, Dr. Callahan, who came up with this thought about that it's an evolution, and it is an evolution. Whenever we communicate to the parents at home, we talked about how our program is evolving, adapting over time. But the science term is about things which are divergent and things which are convergent. Parts of our experience, we came together, and times we had to split apart. And we want to share that story with you. So I've been here 9 years. This is my just finished my 9th summer in the district. And I'm involved now in the 2nd strategic plan. I've used this graphic before. I know Dr. Champ has used this graphic before. The first strategic plan that I was involved with was divided up into, remember, we talked about those 4 pillars, right? 21st century learning, social emotional learning, networks of support, and professional learning. And then in 2018, when the community gathered again and Dr. Champ led the development of a new strategic plan, some of those areas were basically similar to what we did in the past, because it's a continuation, right? In 5 years, you can't really expect such major change. It's going to take more, 4, 5, 6 to 10 years. You're going to see, I think, really take root in the district to see that experience changing for kids and for teachers. So it now formed into really 3 major areas: authentic learning, the whole child, and cultural competency. So my area of main responsibility dealt with authentic learning. One of the first things we needed to do, this is all pre-pandemic, right? And also, don't forget, the first year of the strategic plan was 2019. So the year the pandemic hit, we were in the middle of the first year of this new strategic plan. So our major goal is to develop innovative problem solvers, critical and creative thinkers, effective communicators, strong collaborators, who can apply their knowledge and skills to navigate real-world challenges. And we started trying to unpack what that meant and how to really achieve that. And I came up with this schematic with the help of a lot of the leaders, where we wanted to look at authentic learning through the lens of how it's supported. We wanted to investigate how we use space, the physical environment of a classroom and of a school, and the use of time, the scheduling, when kids meet, when teachers meet, and so forth. And we started really grounding ourselves in that work in the first year. Also, Dr. Callahan and his teachers did a great job of really starting to investigate a definition of inquiry, and that started years ago, actually. And we wanted to come up with something that was easy to understand. We want a process that can be used at the early elementary all the way through high school. And what came out of it, the latest iteration, is the inquiry cycle, which we started working towards. We talked about it also during the Tri-States Visit in Science that happened in February 2020, right before everything changed for us. And with authentic learning, in a nutshell, we want to make sure the kids are engaged in the learning, where there's excitement around the content. We want to focus on their interests and have excitement around the curricula that's being taught. But not just engagement, but also empowering kids to pursue their passions, their interests, and to focus on their future. And that's the blending of that term engaging and empowering. At the elementary level, to be honest with you, we spent a lot of time and really met with a consultant to really help us understand how to rearrange the elementary level schedule. We did that. This year, we're actually trying to implement that schedule. We're doing, I think, a pretty good job with it. But don't forget, we had to change that all during the pandemic. So this is like the first real year that we have a little bit more time where teachers can meet together, which was a major aspect of the new schedule. And also having specials and having certain times which are more locked in than they were in the past. The high school, the secondary level, that's still to be done. We also invested a lot of time in terms of studying the use of space. I think this right here, thanks to the PEF, this space and the new furniture in the middle school library and really all now the libraries at the elementary level as well have flexible furniture. And I know that we're going to have a work session talking about the use of space in November or December. December. So we'll talk about it a little bit more then. But again, Hutchinson School, all the classrooms, the research that was done by the Innovation Committee over the past 3-4 years really led to this point, and the PEF again was also very helpful in getting that off the ground, especially these new learning commons. So 2020. So we have to talk about now the cycles that we went through. So pre-March 2020, what is social distancing? Right? We didn't know what that didn't exist in our lexicon. We had no idea what that meant. But kids were in person, it was full time, it was just like we used to go to school. It was great. Pandemic hit. Spring 2020, I don't personally like to think about it too much. Not really as much as a professional, but I think as a parent, when we all had to go, we were all secluded in our own homes. We turned on the computers and the screens, and we were next to our loved ones when they were doing the same thing, trying to learn as well, while you were trying to teach. We were trying to develop a sense of a school or a program. Virtual, full virtual at home. That was a really dark period for everyone. And it's hard to, we don't really want to forget about it, but there's some lessons there. Then over the summer, 2 summers ago, we looked at different models. It was best that we developed a hybrid model. That was selected by the district and the different committees that we had, where some kids were in, some kids were out. We flipped over an A-B during the day, but really that put such an onus and a change in the teaching environment. We had to turn the cameras on. We had interaction with children not only in front of you, but also behind that screen at home. So that lasted until April. In April, we invited the children back. However, we know that some kids still remain virtual. Thankfully, this year, over the summer, we had a little bit of a hiccup, right? Because we thought that things were kind of getting much better and maybe over trending. However, we know that this year we are back full-time in person, thankfully, but we still have masks on, which is obvious, and we're socially distanced. So it's not over yet. What's in the future and post-pandemic, whatever that is, we're going to ask some of our experts to talk about that and what they predict as well. I know when we talk a little bit about technology, I'll ask Mr. Zabalos to explain a little bit, but this is just a graphic that shows the whole lifeblood of our school system had to be dependent on an online system based on devices and technology that did not exist, in essence, at the elementary level. Especially, and John likes to tell the story all the time, where he had, like, the month before the pandemic hit, he was in a meeting at Salvador about parents who were worried about screen time. And then, boom, right? We're not worried about screen time anymore. But if you kind of if you kind of move forward to now, we don't want to be married to those devices in the classroom today, right? That's something to be cognizant on, and we'll talk about that as well. Again, we had to find and research a cadre of new applications to interact with kids, to assess kids in the classroom who are at home, or some kids were still in class, and we'll talk about assessment as well tonight. And the PEF sponsored, and they paid for some of the items that we're using still today, which we're very thankful for. So over the summer, the administrators met in June, and some of us were really thinking about, hey, we have a strategic plan. We're 1 year in, right? But that first year, and then also then last year, was greatly interrupted in so many different ways. And I was part of an elementary group that kind of brainstormed and talked about, maybe we should focus on like something we talk about. We need time to reflect. We need time to recover, and we need time to repair. Those words resonated with some of the leaders we're talking about. And then the next work session focused more on social emotional learning. But we really kind of, and you'll hear this tonight, we're trying to understand and realize that the children in front of us, and even the adults too, there's damage. Social emotional learning and some struggles, because if people, children, adults, don't feel comfortable and don't feel safe, and they're not in the right state of mind, learning is going to be much more difficult. Okay. And that's just a schematic we came with. This is the reality, the hard reality, and I know my colleagues spoke about this and kind of thought about, okay, the current 12th grade, when was the last time they had a normal school year, uninterrupted? The current 12th graders, the seniors, the last time that was 9th grade. The current freshmen, the last time they had uninterrupted learning was in 6th grade. The current 6th graders, the last time was when they were 3rd graders, and then so forth and so on. So if you think about it, really the last time was in 2018-19, where we had a full regular school year. And I think that is what we're going to talk a little bit about today. The reality of the pandemic, where our kids, where our teachers, how they kind of adapted and how they persevered. And I think those are important discussions that we're going to have with our panel experts. This is the framework that we're kind of working with. As we reflect on the pandemic over the past 20 months, we continue to navigate through the effects of moving towards and away from the remote virtual environment, while attempting to shift back to more authentic learning experiences, more inquiry-based learning experiences for children. So that's sort of what's in front of us, right? And that's what I think the leadership's been talking about now for the past year and a half. How do we kind of come back? And there is a long haul effect. So to kind of talk about that story and share that story, we invited our guests tonight, and you know who they are. And essentially, we wanted to engage with a panel of experts. So we developed with the administrators and a series of questions, which I shared with the board as well, that I'm going to ask the panel. I'll play the MC for a while. And of course, the board, please feel free to ask, follow up during that time. Okay? I'm hoping we can get through these because I really think it tells a good story. But again, thank you for joining us. So I'm going to start now. I feel like a game show host. So this is your first question. So in what ways has the pandemic changed the classroom community, classroom routines, and also classroom management?
I think I was going to take that one.
Sure.
So I'm going to echo a lot of what Dr. Garcia said. Obviously, the immediate impact is that our young students, mine in particular in 2nd grade, have never had a normal school year. And the routines in early childhood, especially K through 2, are so vital, especially in the early months, especially in the early years, to establish and ensuring an optimal learning environment for the entire year. One where each child can learn and the teachers can work to meet the individual needs of his or her students. Without those routines and procedures, learning becomes challenging and teaching becomes overwhelming. The hybrid model last year made it especially difficult to establish that classroom community. Instead, we had 2 classroom communities, each having their own identity and culture. When we returned in April, children were so happy to be in the classroom together. We were so happy to have them all back. But reestablishing routines and procedures with the class of 23 instead of 12 was tough, even for an seasoned teacher like myself. The responsive classroom techniques, which we loved, that program, but it was hard to do it with social distancing. There was no morning circle, no high fives, handshakes, or partner work. But I have to say, my colleagues all around the district, we made it work. We figured out ways to incorporate activities into our classroom because we knew how important it was to establish a sense of classroom community, especially during a pandemic. The elementary teacher now takes the time out of each day to make sure hands are sanitized before meals and after meals, before materials are touched and after materials are touched. We clean the desks every day, and we have earned a new badge of mask enforcer. All of these pandemic routines have now become normalized in our classrooms and are part of our regular classroom routines. In fact, in my classroom, it's a job to give out the hand sanitizer. As for our students, I think the most significant observation of our young learners is that they, and I'm quoting, forgot how to do school. They don't know how to do school, is what some of my colleagues said. And many teachers have noticed that our young learners need a lot of redirection, routines, and that's what we're doing. We've had to change the way we work with our students. Partner and small group work continues to pose challenges because of social distancing, although we are slowly trying to reestablish these norms back into our reading, writing, and math lessons. And Dr. Champ was in my room and saw the kids scattered all over the place the other day during reading workshop. Being able to hear each other while wearing masks, battling noises from outside, the air filter, and the usual noise in the classroom isn't easy. But as always, classroom teachers are finding ways to make it work. Our groups are smaller, we meet less often, and we get to individual students less often than we would like. Nothing is ideal and nothing is the way it was. But as we have done throughout the pandemic, we are rising to the occasion and become masters of flexibility. We continuously find ways to make our classroom communities warm, welcoming, and safe spaces for every one of our students. Most importantly, we take the time each day to make sure that each of our students feels seen and valued. I have never been more in awe of and proud of the elementary teachers in Pelham as I have these past 2 years.
Thank you, Claire. Who else would like to share thoughts at different levels of the district?
So on the middle school level, forming a community is something that we really focus on as we bring 4 elementary schools together. And unfortunately, our current students, some of them never really met each other, interacted with each other before. So asking them to collaborate and do group work in the classroom sometimes is a challenge because at that middle school age, they're not always comfortable sharing with people they have never met before, never spoken to before. One of the things that we did this year as a 7th grade class, we felt really important that we should bring some sort of normalcy. So we had a field trip. We obviously had to be creative, and so we brought the field trip here. And we brought a program that we have used in the past called Mountain Workshop, where they do all team building experiences. The feedback from our students was incredible, and they got out of it exactly what we had hoped. We literally had students saying, wow, I got to meet someone that I had never met before, and I got to work with someone that I never knew was a peer of mine, a classmate of mine. And I felt like that fostered such a nice environment, a nice community for our students, that they're now able to transfer back into the classroom and be willing to collaborate and work together in groups and do those things that they once used to be able to do with ease. And this year it's been a little bit more of a transition for us, but we are definitely moving forward in the right direction.
I'm practicing wait time.
Thinking to. I'll jump in.
Sure.
At the secondary level, in the social studies classes, we also were keenly aware of the issues that arise when you're discussing different topics, and half of your students are at home, half are in school, and even when everyone came back together and students were not comfortable, as Janine said, participating in a Socratic seminar the way that they would normally have been by that point of the year. So we made a commitment in our core classes to spend time at the beginning of the year doing or incorporating lessons on identity and community, so that students would not just enter into a 6th grade or 9th grade social studies class and get right to work. They spent at least 4 to 5 days just looking at self-identity, looking at the community within the school, the community at large, their responsibilities to each other, classroom compacts, and we felt that that would also help bring our students together so that we'd be able to start training them back into discussion and respectful disagreement at times, which is what our goal is, to have them think and look at different points of view.
So, you know, a lot of training need to happen. We didn't know what to offer the teachers originally, right? We really kind of knew that they had to adapt quickly. So my next question is, in what ways does the pandemic influence professional practice to adapt instruction with the changing environments?
Can I ask a question?
Please.
I was struck by something Janine said about, in your graphic showing the last normal class for an 8th grader was 5th
Yep.
grade,
Yes.
right? So I've always been amazed by how the middle school acts as kind of a melting pot, right? The kids have never, well, I mean, they played a sports team together, but they didn't know each other. They knew of each other, but they didn't know each other until they got to middle school. And everything got mixed up. And so I can't imagine, they're now in 8th grade and they're just now having that experience. So can you elaborate a little bit? I mean, how do you overcome that?
Well, we create activities, we create opportunities, and we also create a climate, as Dr. Thompson said, to foster a level of respect where they feel comfortable speaking, and also encouraging them to be rather open-minded and, you know, accepting of other things that their classmates perhaps want to contribute to a classroom discussion, things of that nature. So really we try to help, like, give them the tools and some guidelines when they're working in group activities to help foster that, like, community within the classroom. Sometimes, like, for example, Dr. Thompson mentioned we do like a Socratic seminar. When we do a Socratic seminar, we don't just pose a question and say, this is the question we're going to debate. We give them norms, you know, guidelines of how to appropriately engage in the discussion. What are some helpful phrases they can use, things of that nature. So we really do scaffold for them the ways that they can, you know, interact with one another in an appropriate and meaningful way.
So if they were doing all this in 6th grade and now they're 8th graders, they're 3 years more developmentally
Right.
advanced.
Right.
Is that 3 years of advancement, does that cause more of a problem, or is it less of a problem in learning those, you know, in that sort of whole melting pot thing?
So, you know, I think it depends on the group of students you have at that time. There are some students that did very well during the pandemic, and there are, you know, a lot of students that did not do as well. So through our transition programs, that's something that we foster as they're coming in. We're doing grade level assemblies. Mr. Llewellyn and I are doing tours. So we started with every 8th grade class we've met with. We're going to continue to meet with the classes, go over those norms, being part of the team meetings and speaking about individual students that may be struggling. The teachers will reach out to them. We have groups that our psychologists and our counselors run to help foster that collaboration with students that may be struggling a little more than others with that. So it's really an entire school effort through our team meetings, our psychologists, our social workers, our teachers, where every day, during one period of the day, our teachers sit and discuss the students that need help, that need support. They talk about what works in their classroom. If a student's struggling, maybe what are some strategies you have to help with that? What are some norms you have in your classrooms that might help us develop some routines? So it's a total collaborative effort. And some students do better at it than others, but we're going to continue on this journey and working with every child.
Okay. So my next question is talking about the influence. How did the pandemic influence your professional practice, and how did you adapt instruction?
So since March of 2020, when the pandemic began, we've had to continuously adapt our professional practice. Going back to March of 2020, when students weren't coming to school anymore, right away we had to figure out how to adapt our professional practice to reach students at home. So I do intervention for elementary school, and my students really need to touch and manipulate and feel materials in order to learn. They struggle with concepts, why they come to intervention. And I remember thinking, like, how am I going to teach fourth graders about fraction when we don't have fraction tiles? So it's going back to figuring out how am I going to get through that computer to them so they can learn these concepts. So we had to continuously adapt instruction. Fast forward to the hybrid model, when that started in September, it was great to have students back. However, then how are you going to interact with the students on the computer and the students in person at the same time? I remember that first day paying so much attention to the kids in the computer. You'd actually give them more support because they were at home, but then you'd have to remind yourself you've got kids in the classroom too. Many of my lessons involve games. I just think that's a great way to engage kids. So how do you play a board game for math when you've got one child at home and two in front of you? How do you engage them at the same time? So again, continuously adapting instruction. I've seen my colleagues all throughout Prospect Hill do the same thing and all across all the schools in Pelham. Now this year, it's wonderful. We're so happy to have them all back. But again, it's going back to the visuals on the screen right now about the last normal school year. So we think in our elementary school, the youngest grade level that's ever had a normal school year are our third graders. My daughter is second grade. I am in second grade. I'm a Pelham parent as well. And she's never had a normal school year. So when I look at that through her eyes, it's really eye-opening, and thinking about that with the students in our elementary school. So we have some third graders who came back to school this year. If they were fully remote, they haven't stepped into school since they were in first grade. And so now we're adapting instruction. I think we thought we were going to have to adapt our instruction in order to meet the academic needs, and we do. But I think that one of the maybe surprises that's come out is how much we have to adapt our instruction in order to meet the social emotional needs and the learning behavior needs. So we have students who, we're having to teach more than ever before, making friends, keeping friends, having age-appropriate conversations, peer-to-peer conversations, working in a group. But also the learning behaviors, how to work independently, how to build that stamina, how to stick with a problem, persist when you have difficulty. So, and we know if we don't address those learning behaviors and those social emotional needs, then as we go to fill in the academic gaps, the learning isn't going to happen. So we need to make sure we back up and explicitly model, explicitly teach these learning behaviors and address the social emotional needs so that the learning can happen. So I think what I see my colleagues doing the most now is really adapting, managing our own expectations, and making sure that we kind of slow down and back up and address that so that the learning can happen.
I find that seeing that chart, my ninth grade students, sometimes I'll tell myself, they're acting so young. But the last time that they were in normal school was in sixth grade. So I find myself, stepping back and giving them that grace, like teaching them how to take notes. They were watching us on a screen. So I have to be patient and show them, like, okay, this is how you study for math. Everyone's, like breaking everything down. That I find the middle school does such a great job at teaching them how to study, but they've been, in the virtual world. So I have to remind myself every day that, I am also responsible for teaching them those skills that they have probably missed. And we do have to have grace with the students and adapt, knowing that that's the case.
I also think that we have to recognize that even young students, as young as first and second grade, have become adept at technology. And that's a strength that they're bringing into the classroom, that they know how to navigate and they know how to log on to things like never before. I mean, I remembered having to capital P shift, and they're like, no, I got it. They know how to log on. And so knowing that, we have to say, okay, so how can we take what they've learned, what they have learned and mastered, and incorporate into our teaching so that they are feeling successful and they are feeling like, I know how to do that, I can do that, and like still maintain that balance, because we also learned that they need their teachers and they need their peers. And their parents need them to be in school too. This parent needed her kid back in school. So I think that we have to recognize that technology is going to be a big part of their life now. It's not something they're going to easily let go of.
Yeah, sorry. I was just going to say, in terms of, I also teach ninth graders as well, and honestly, I had a conversation with Dr. Callahan about them not really being in school, like in a traditional setting, since sixth grade, and thinking about like the beginning of the year when you are building that community and putting in these routines. A lot of that they haven't been used to, and really as teachers we haven't been used to it either. I mean, I remember looking back at some of the PowerPoints that I had done in 2019, 2018, and I'm looking at, I can remember specifically, it's a game called Lines and Blobs where I get the students up and like having them move to like figure out the things that they like or don't like. And I hadn't done that with a class in 3 years. So now it's like, I want to do this, but now I need to think to myself, well, how am I going to incorporate this back in the classroom? Are the students going to feel comfortable moving around? Like, I have to really kind of check myself on my own practices and whether or not there's anything that needs to be adapted. And then at the same time, I need to think, is there anything that I need to really structure or scaffold for these students that haven't really been in a classroom like this since sixth grade to make sure that they're successful and comfortable in something as simple as a ice-breaking community building activity. And those are crucial. I personally believe that those first couple of weeks, you establishing such a comfortable and caring, warming community for these students, it's essential for the school year to go the way that you would like it to go. If those students don't feel comfortable, then I don't think learning is going to happen as easily. So I truly do take those activities to heart and really making sure that the community is built in a foundational way. But as not having done that in 3 years, I really had to check my own self and my own practices and just make sure that the students felt comfortable doing it. So that was just one thing in particular that I noticed on my own end, and I'm not sure if anybody else did. But.
And Karen, in that same breath, being a science teacher and having labs, do you find that you have certain students that are a little apprehensive about getting together closely in their little lab experiments, and some that just dive,
Yeah, so that's always interesting too. I think it's really any school year students that are like willing to just dive right in, or whether they're more apprehensive. But now it's more of, I don't want to say they're apprehensive in terms of getting close to classmates, but it's more whether or not they think it's okay. It's not that they're scared to do it, but it's more like looking at like either the teacher or other people, and they're thinking, is this allowed? Am I allowed to do this? Am I allowed to be next to these individuals, this spacing? And we, once again, have to build in these routines and making sure that the students are aware that this is how we're going to set up our labs. So I think making that clear kind of helps them ease like some of their worries a little bit. But yeah, I think that it's not so much of a fear as opposed to whether or not they know it's okay. And I think that that's kind of just this disequilibrium that we find a lot of students in around a lot of this stuff, because there has been, I don't know, so much question around a lot of things.
Thank you.
We'll talk about that a little bit later on too, because the reintroduction of labs and lab sciences has been a big thing. Because the students weren't able for 2 years to touch anything. Initially, we weren't sure if the virus would be spread on surfaces, so we really weren't touching anything. And now we're kind of back to expectations really that we fulfill the standards that are in place in New York State and to carry out the lab sciences that had been really put on hold. So we shifted to a lot of virtual simulations in labs. So the students that are coming back, I mean, you mentioned this earlier, Mr. Bryce mentioned this earlier, our 8th graders, it's first year, they take lab science, that's a Regents-based lab science. So teaching them how to do a lab is very different, because if you go back, a few years, they were really in a primary grade, and they totally skipped over middle school, and we have a very strong middle school science program that prepares them to do labs. So to Garrett's point and to the question that you asked, it's been a huge lift to try to reintroduce those labs, try to maintain social distancing, keep the masks on, teach kids about sanitary practice and how to clean. Teenagers don't typically like to clean, so that tends to be a challenge. So just those simple protocols, you've probably heard the theme of almost like classroom management. It's been really the heavy lift. Sometimes we go straight to academics, but good teachers know, and all the research bears out, that if you don't have a properly managed classroom, the kids are not going to learn anything, right? If they don't like you and your classroom is not managed well, they're not going to learn well, right? So the teachers tonight have really told you that one of the heavy lifts of coming back together is really establishing those protocols in the classroom. I mean, I joke around, they're used to working in teams, but not in lab, in group chats, right? So, and that's where they've collaborated the last couple of years. So getting them to work in teams at a lab station and stay socially distant and to follow those practices has been a very, very big challenge. And the teachers have done a really phenomenal job. And that's K through 12 because our Science 21 program, for example, is very hands-on as well. So we had to depart from that for 2 years, and now it's being reintroduced. So that's very hands-on and collaborative as well. So we see the same kind of phenomena in place. And that, again, heavy lift falls on those teachers to establish those protocols so the kids can do that.
An additional challenge for the middle school, a little bit different than in the high school, is our middle school kids are just all right on top of each other. We're doing a lab, everybody's running to the same table, touching the same things. They're just so excited to, to get in those groups. So it's pull your mask up, take a step back. We're sharing, we're working together. So it's like they're elementary kids. If you ever see like soccer games, right? If your children played soccer, there's the ball and everybody's around the ball, and that's how it is. They all get to their lab tables, and so in some ways it's great and it's exciting, but it takes a lot of management.
I will say my favorite part about the at-home schooling with middle schoolers was watching them with one person in the classroom and one person at home doing the experiments together, or like the egg drop out our window. That was like really fun. They'd be like, Mom, can you tie me and do this? So I think there's some pretty cool things that happen, but I'm sure that's part of why they're so excited to be back in the classroom and actually getting to touch everything.
I had one question that you mentioned, I forget who mentioned that, about study skills. Because I know the one thing that my kids told me about when they came back from college the first time they went was, wow, I think, I really learned how to study, and it really helped me. So it's kind of disheartening to hear that that's one thing that got lost in this. And is there a way to accelerate through that, or are we using the technology that they've picked up skills in the past 2 years to help them complement those study skills?
One of the things I notice in the middle school is the teachers are teaching note-taking. They're teaching how to chunk things. They're given more graphic organizers. They're taught how to take notes. They're taught how to read material and take notes. And there's a lot less with the computers, a lot less on the Chromebook. They're taking notes by hand and doing a lot more things by hand. So many times I go in the classrooms and the Chromebooks are there, but they're shut for a majority of the class because they're going back to basic teaching. And I do think in time it's going to pay off because we're doing it 6 through 8. And hopefully by the time you get the ninth graders in next year, they're going to have that foundation.
So I have a question that's sort of about the effects of technology and what a lot of us have experienced ourselves and see with kids, which is shortening of attention spans that I'm guessing you're seeing in the classroom as well. And so I'm wondering, is that something that you're trying to strengthen a little bit, like expand people's attention spans, or are you using the technology in little bits to keep them focused? So could you just speak about attention spans a little bit and what your thoughts are?
You may want to weave in stamina with that too.
That was one thing that we had spoken about, and I think there's like kind of two hills to kind of talk about with regards to students' stamina or endurance in the classroom. I think the first is like understanding the students went from this typical school year where it was like normal from 2018 to 2019, and then towards the end of that we go transition into this virtual model where now the students are in front of a screen full time. And I think that transition to this fully virtual model, that is a hill that the students had to overcome in terms of screen time. That definitely took a hit to their own stamina or endurance. And I think now, after transitioning back into somewhat of this full person model, now the students are transitioning from 35-minute classes to 41-minute classes. So then we're also taking a hit to their stamina there. And then to kind of compound that, if you teach a science class, there are days where you now have double periods. So it's not just 41 minutes, but it's 82 minutes in a class full time. So I think in terms of my own practice and own instruction, ways that I'm trying to make sure that we're not losing students that I do feel might be, losing stamina or don't have that endurance to make it through a full 82-minute class, it's trying to chunk up these classes and break them into as small bits as possible. So like, for instance, I start off with a do now that might be 5 minutes, all right? But you'll hit on that do now, and then you'll go from that to maybe a 10-minute activity into a 15-minute, independent or group work activity. And I think that chunking and pacing of a lesson is super important to, make sure that we're not overworking the students, but we're making sure that we do get through content, and we're making sure that, everything is covered in a timely manner. At least in my own practice, that's one way I feel to combat that potential stamina deficiency, if you will. But that's one thing at least that I've noticed on my own end.
And do you find that chunking that you're talking about is different from the way that you were doing it previously?
So it's not so much that it's different in the way that I was doing it, but it's much more deliberate. Because I think you definitely have to read your room. And I think that if there's a time where you feel like we're in the middle of this activity, but we're starting to lose students, maybe we need to move on to something different and change up the pace just so that we can get these students back engaged and back focused up. And that's just from my own experiences.
I find that in my classroom, the innovative committee has really helped me with the furniture, but I find that I do see that their stamina sometimes, is fading, so I do get them up more. And now that they can, it's kind of nice. I have these great tables that they can move up and they can write on, and they can present their work. So getting them up, I do station work, like, okay, get up, and you can even the fact that they're getting up and writing the problems on the board has helped. So I find like I'm doing that more just to get them up and get them engaged. And I would imagine that in the elementary school it would be similar.
Yes, so the research typically shows that, especially in the elementary grades, that their attention span is about their age minus 1 or 2 minutes, or is it plus 1 or 2 minutes? I don't have quite
Depends
right
on the
there.
day.
Depends on the day. So we know about where their attention span is, and so we work to build up their stamina to that. Also, in the first 6 weeks of school, you want to really build the student's stamina for certain things like reading stamina, writing stamina. The research shows when you do that, the rest of the year, they'll be pretty strong and just continuously build their stamina along, which is why last year was so challenging, because every 6 weeks, it felt like there was a different model or something different and something that we had to address as a school community and a district community. But this year so far, we're able to really establish those strong routines and procedures and build their stamina. And the beauty in the elementary schools is that we have the sustained amount of time to say, okay, today we're going to read for 25 minutes, and they can cozy up with their books. And at Hutchinson, we have the innovative furniture, so they can really get comfortable with their choice of where they are and things like that. And so we are working to sort of build their stamina without using the screen time as a way of focus, but to build their stamina in other ways for reading and writing and math and hands-on activities in science and things like that. So in the elementary days, I think I can speak to us really sort of not using screen time as a way of having them focus, but as a tool for intervention and things like that.
And I think we have to teach at the elementary level explicitly, how do you listen? You look at the person, your hands and feet are still, and you constantly reiterate that. I find children in my classroom are playing in their desk and they don't realize I can see them. I'm like, I can see you now, you're not home anymore. So it's just constantly like eyes on the speaker, hands and feet still. And I say in my classroom, engage your frontal lobe, engage, so that you are attending. Ask me a question about what I said. Those are ways that you can show that you're paying attention, and that's the way that you can remember what we're saying. So even at 7, I'm trying to reinforce that, because, like I said, they forgot how to do school. And so these are things that kindergarten teachers do really, really, really well, so that when they get to second grade, you're just kind of reinforcing what they've learned in K and 1, and they quickly move on. But I think that's important in everything that Melody said too.
So, I'm sorry. I have a stupid question.
No question is stupid.
I'm still stuck on the number of years minus 5 minutes. How does that work again? So if you're a 6-year-old, you get 6
So
minutes.
like I have
minus 1?
like 10-year-olds, so my lesson should be about 8 to 9 minutes. The research shows, right? I shouldn't speak for over 8 minutes continuously. Their attention span is, we need a little bit of a break, whether that means I have my lesson for 8 minutes and I'm telling them, here's what we're learning for today, and then they go off and they work in partnerships.
I explained a whole lot.
Okay.
One of the areas where we definitely see stamina being an issue, it actually marries this question that was asked to the next question that I think Dr. Garcia was going to ask.
Yep.
Is in the area of assessment, right? So as you know, in math, and I think Ms. Rodriguez could probably back this up if she's had this experience, but I've talked to a number of the math teachers on the secondary level. We had to break up a lot of our math assessments so that they were smaller, because there was more digital collaboration, we'll put it that way, on longer tests when they were sent home. So we took some decisive measures to try to limit that and to get a good assessment of student learning that we believed was a reflection of that individual student. So we had to break things up. As we start to reintroduce assessments that are a little bit longer, we're finding that the focus on those assessments is not where it would normally be. And the reality is, whether it's, Regents exams or SATs or AP exams, eventually that stamina has to be brought back up. So I think to your question, Leah, I think we're working on that very deliberately. But I want to kind of answer that, I think, through the lens of the next question. That
About
Dr.
assessment
Garcia
and how do we know and feedback from children. So I think it's good movement. But yes, Doctor.
One thing, so I think it was mentioned at the last time you all presented the data, sort of where students were academically at the end of last year, that one of the issues that came up specifically with early elementary and readers and writers workshop was switching to more direct instruction, and that was one thing the consultants had sort of advised. So I was wondering are we completely back to normal in terms of that curriculum? Was there anything we learned from that? Was there any spot where direct instruction was actually better? Or?
So even throughout the pandemic, our mini lessons stayed no more than 10 minutes, our direct instruction. But what we were advised to do and what we tried to do during the pandemic, and now it really is, as Claire mentioned, on the minds of every teacher and their objective, and that is to have as much time with small groups and conferring one-on-one. Because remember that a conference with the student is direct instruction. The student is just leading it, and you're pushing them forward based upon your discussion with them. So our focus in our PD this year, our focus with the principals in reading and writing is, and I think I said it last spring, you get the more bang for your buck through a really good conference or a small group of direct instruction. So we're working on, really making sure that that's happening as much as possible.
First of all, thank you. It's very illuminating. It sounds like, especially at the elementary school level, there are a lot of common challenges, whether or not it's building stamina or acclimating kids back. But the irony now is that you're back in your physical classroom, so it actually makes it harder to see best practice of what your other colleagues are doing. So I'm just wondering, how do best practices percolate up? At Hutch, 3rd grade, there's a really interesting reading intervention, or there's a really interesting other kind of deployment that's like, wow, if that is happening, how does that bubble up and propagate across the network, especially at the elementary school level.
So do you mean at the grade level or across the school K to 5?
Well, I think generally at the grade level, like if there's a really great fourth grade lesson and there's a particular unit and there's, a fourth grade teacher at Hutch has really figured out a way to deliver, and you just know that that would be gold if Prospect and Simonoi fourth graders could see that, So how does that, is there a mechanism for that to bubble up?
Yeah.
For grade level meeting time, I know myself for interventionists, and we have grade level meetings, and I meet with the interventionists across the schools. That's how I've gotten some of my best ideas. And so we'll share resources. I've recently shared what I've been doing with phonemic awareness, my first graders with my other colleagues across at all 3 elementary schools, and I've gotten great things from them too. So that grade level meeting time that we have is really vital.
Got it. And
I
you
also
do
think
grade.
I also think our PD model supports it because we really do. We're back to a PD model for reading, writing, and math, where we have grades meeting together, and then we go off into a classroom and we get to watch it in practice. We get to practice it together. We practice it with a consultant. So we always make sure that we're sharing best practices in that way and seeing it happening, giving it a chance in front of our colleagues. And then we go back off to debrief and talk about what that looked like, what that felt like, and we share across the grade what we're doing in our classrooms to support students at different levels. I also think it goes back to what Steve talked about with the scheduling. We work so hard on a schedule at the elementary level to make sure that teachers have a time each week as a grade to meet with the principals, the directors. It's really a joint meeting where the agenda is shared. I may have some agenda items, the grade level may come to me with an agenda item, and we get to talk consistently. And that's something that we really have been talking about for so many years, and we're really able to execute this year. And even in the short amount of time, in the past 2 weeks, I've gotten to meet with each of my grade levels twice. And we've had really great conversations about what you're talking about, best practices. What are we doing to address, students that might be in first grade that don't have the skills that we anticipated? What does our small group instruction look like with those children? What does an intervention cycle look like for those kids? And so we're really sharing within the school. And then I think as principals, we're always talking and sharing best practices and things that we've learned from our meetings, so we can bring them back to our, prospective schools.
And
so I think the schedule has definitely helped.
I was just saying, we have a Google Drive. We have shared Google Drive folders. So we're always dropping things in the Google Drive. So in the ELA Google Drive folder, if I do a lesson or I find a graphic organizer that I think is great for a particular unit, I drop it in that drive, and any teacher can do that. And we have one for math, we have one for science, we have one for social studies.
And is everyone on the same scope and sequence across all 4?
Yes.
One thing is that I think we've been working on for the past 8-9 years is making sure that the avenues of communication are improving across all the schools. Even this experience itself, the secondary people are hearing elementary experiences and vice versa. So, this is a great exercise for us. But whether it's looking at the schedule, when can teachers collaborate and meet, right? Whether even when we develop PLCs, where teachers can collaborate and meet, and generously the community gives us that time to do that. Grade level meetings after school on Wednesdays. The ability to, I think, look at curricula, but look at practice vertically with our directors and our principals who are constant communication with one another. So, one of our greatest assets, and we have many, but is I think the administrative leadership team, because they work well together, right? So, and it takes time to develop that. But I think that open communication where at least I hope that we don't look at ourselves through those silos as one elementary school versus another elementary school versus another. Because at any moment, anyone can switch and can move away. It's your 5th grade teacher, you can teach anywhere. But I think that is something that we've, as a system, if we're a true school system, to be able to see what's happening at Hutchinson in 3rd grade and whether the 3rd grade teacher in Simonoi can be using that, right? And that's the key piece when, a few years ago, making sure we have a Reader's Writers Workshop approach working with Fidelity, being taught with Fidelity, or a Math and Focus program with Fidelity, and that's just not happening at one school, but across all the schools. So I think it really deals with making sure that we're communicating it well. But even, I know we've done a little bit of this, but I think we need to do more of it, probably is have, visitation and learning walks. I know that's happened in the past where, I remember a former high school principal went down to the elementary school.
I'm a huge fan
to
of
see what was
learning walks.
happening.
Yes.
To learn about it.
Yeah.
This is sort of indicative of the pandemic. We were trying to start this work, right? And we can continue it, making it, and then all of a sudden, the world sort of slowed down for us, and we're trying to crawl out of it.
Yeah.
So that when we go back and look at the strategic plan, what do we need to do better? How do we get back on the horse and try to make it a better race? This is what we need to do, and I think it's important.
I would love to tag on to any learning walk. Those are
Please.
gold. There's
Great.
gold. Yep.
But can I also, so I know we talk about the pandemic a lot in negative terms and. But
I do. I'm a very negative person.
But I think, yes.
But I've grown. I think there are some positives to it.
So I would like to compliment one of those positives, and I think, when we were thrown into March, one of the strengths of Pelham and of their teachers and their administrators was they automatically started to collaborate together. So this mechanism that we were trying to build over time actually sort of blossomed out of need. And so teachers who weren't across the district necessarily collaborating together now can't imagine themselves not doing it that way. And I think, we have a lot to say about the pandemic one way or the other, but I do think that that's a positive that has come out of it, is this network of collaboration across the district by grade level teams and teachers to work together. And that's really been a positive for our children.
And it wasn't easy, because I remember when we came up with this idea, in April, May, we're like, hey, you know what, we need to have teams of teachers working on third grade ELA, and they can't be the same ones working in third grade math. Like we wanted to make sure kids, if they're going home and the parents are there and they're turning on the TV, they're turning on the camera and they're seeing their kids online, we wanted to make sure that the experience was as similar as possible, right? We know, and it was a struggle because teachers wanted to make sure the personality was in there, and it was still there. But the thing is that it was an opportunity to make sure that we didn't want to leave children or teachers out there on an island by themselves. And that was the main impetus for making sure that you guys collaborated with each other or had teams of teachers develop those experiences across the district, which we really never did before like that. And if it's a positive, because I think a lasting effect is, as Tricia said, was that people are now used to it. They rely on each other. I think we just don't want people to kind of retreat into their own little worlds again. But I think it was a positive that kind of came out of it. So I thank you for reminding me. Sometimes it's hard.
We've always collaborated.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm here 24 years, and I always remember having grade level meetings at different schools, and we were always very collaborative. That just forced us to do it in a different way.
Yeah.
And it really forced all of us to think out of the box and work together. But I'm going to just push back a little bit and say we've always been a very collaborative group as a whole district.
And we still want to collaborate, and I think that's why you hear teachers say, we want more planning time, we want more planning time. It doesn't mean we want siloed planning time, it means we want planning time to collaborate with each other. We did amazing work collaborating with each other on those half-day Wednesdays, and it was some of our best work. And so we enjoy collaborating and planning and sharing best practices with each other and putting our brains together to create a great lesson for our students.
I imagine it also gives you the space to compare notes on how students are doing with routines or struggling with stamina.
Yes.
Because this is a new experience for everybody.
Yes.
Steve, you may be getting to this, but all of what we're hearing leads me to believe that our interventionists' jobs must be incredibly busy right now and very different. So would love to hear a little bit of color on how that's changed and what the fall was like. And I'm looking at you, Kim, but I know we have a couple of interventionists here, so would love to hear that. And again, you may be getting to it. So.
No, please, it's a fair question. So.
Definitely, so I do math and reading intervention for Prospect Hill, and we had some grade levels where we had more need than in the past. So having an extra interventionist was, he's been very busy with me. But I think that we've definitely been able to get to more kids than ever before, earlier than ever before. We actually are already seeing kindergarten for math and reading. We have not done that in the past this early in the year. We've been able to push into classrooms to support and get, tier 2, we refer them to kids that need more support, get those plans up and running earlier, and again, be able to just meet the needs of the students so that hopefully in the next 6 to 8 weeks we can see students meeting their goals and hopefully exit intervention and then see if we need to be seeing more students. So the extra interventionist has really been helpful.
I think. So Kate and I, we shared MTSS chair, which is multi-tiered systems of support. And I think something that has been really important this year is just making sure teachers have enough interventions, because a lot of the kids are just, because of the time lost, they need that extra support, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they require special education services, they just require additional support. So making sure our MTSS is really, really tight, and making sure we're meeting with teachers, having time to meet with teachers. Just even having today with the faculty meeting, we were able to meet with a group of teachers just to help provide them with interventions, and that has been really, really important.
So maybe this is a question that's hard to answer, but is there any way to sort of quantify what the increase in interventions has been this year as a result of kids needing to catch up? Or
I think it's too early to quantify that all, but I do think, though, to what Kate was saying, that the added interventionist that we've had in the buildings and utilizing that person in a variety of ways. That interventionist in our building, I'm at Siwanoy and I'm a special ed teacher, but I get to push into the classrooms as well, is pushing in to kindergarten at this point and just taking small groups, while the classroom teacher is providing some direct instruction and intervention as well at that level. And that is the first time we've ever done that. So I think we're noticing that there are some gaps that kids have, but not necessarily we're able to quantify it yet and figure out those numbers. It's too early on. But I think we're just able to utilize the extra hands and the support we have to help meet where the kids are now. Whether that be with math or ELA or even social emotionally. I mean, the added social emotionally learning class that we have now that the psychologist is running.
Oh, that's great.
Once a cycle is just a blessing. It's really amazing. So I consider that an intervention as well, that that is really needed. So I think it just looks different, and we're able to just provide support in a different way with the added help that our buildings have.
Thank you, that's very helpful.
Along those lines, can you yet quantify if there's been an increase of number of students discussed at MTSS meetings and or in the middle school at team meetings? Or are the interventions happening to try and curb the number of students going through that more formal process?
I would say for us, the purpose of our MTSS meetings are to talk about all those kids that we feel, even if a teacher comes to us and says, my whole class is having difficulty with number sense. So it's not, I wouldn't necessarily say we're seeing a larger amount of students that we need to talk about. I think as a whole school, we're seeing, okay, here are targeted areas of need that we're seeing in maybe the younger grades, and here's how we can support that. I would say that's kind of what we're seeing, at least at Prospect.
More overarching kind of interventions that
yeah,
can
like
assist
we want to
teachers
exactly, how can we support the teachers, whether it be with a specific skill like spelling, or whether it be something social emotional as well.
I think at our MTSS at Siwanoy, there have been a little more teachers asking about, I think more emotional, that they're a little more concerned at this point. I think that seems to be the overarching theme right now, that like Claire was saying, establishing those routines right now, that's what's being discussed more, that maybe certain students are just
need a little more time adapting that and like talking about ways we can improve on that as well. I don't think we've talked more about specific students at this time. I agree. I think it's more just like, this is what we need in kindergarten, this is what we need in first grade, this is what we need in fifth grade. Those conversations have been happening.
So it's giving you a vehicle to have those conversations, to identify what the needs are and then
Yes.
tailor the interventions.
Yes, it's
Thank
another way
goodness.
we can collaborate with everybody that's on the team, and then teachers can go there as well. And I think even among the 4 schools, our MTSS chairs and people who are on MTS are talking more too. Like, what are you doing in that building? This is what we're
Definitely.
doing in this building, and kind of streamlining that as well.
I was going to say, thank goodness, Julia, you were, like had a crystal ball to expand to a formal MTSS umbrella of emotional and academic oversight of that type of committee before this all happened, because it was important then, but even more important now.
It's similar in the middle school. We don't have interventionists, and we'd love them if we could get them. That being said, it's similar in the middle school with our MTSS team, and right now the big focus is social emotional. Is we're meeting with each grade. What I said to the 8th grade team today is that your middle school is middle school, first of all, is difficult, right? You either love middle school or you hate it. I happen to love it, but the changes they go through to begin with, and then you add the academics, and so we started out 6th grade normal, and then we came to a screeching halt. Then everybody's virtual. Everybody comes back, and you have paper on your desk, and you have your mask, and you have your divider, and we're half in, half out, and now everybody's together, and socially and emotionally, it takes its toll. I think that's where our biggest focus is. I do believe we're doing a lot of work academically, and we're going to get those students where they need to be. There's no doubt in my mind about that. But we can't get them there until we have them in a better space. So that's really a big focus with our team meetings, our groups. We have more groups than ever. Our psychologists and part-time social worker are stretched. And that's really where the focus is. Did I say we'd love interventionists?
I'd love an AP.
Budget season is
Stay
just
along.
beginning.
Right. Planting some seeds.
So-
Michael has something.
Stay along.
Our coordinating plan, I think it makes sense. Because the kids do need the interventionists and to have the dedicated time with them. So I think you made the right decision with that. And I think it's something, and I don't know if it's qualitative or if we have some sort of quantitative measures to say, justify, we use temporary money to expand this, right? So maybe this is something that we need to think about in terms of budget going forward.
Yes, please. Ooh.
Because I know what I hear from elementary parents a lot is, I wish the class sizes were smaller. I wish, that, and we're limited by our physical buildings.
Right.
Right, but this is an area where we could offer more support to elementary students.
Right.
So switching a little bit, not really switching as much, but we really haven't spoken about students with special needs and how have they fared during the pandemic and how are they being supported even now. So what insights do you have on this?
So, I would say that from last year to this year, it's been so different. Coming back last year after being hybrid, or after being virtual and then being hybrid, and then finally getting the kids back in the building. Touching on that stamina, I remember just taking, every time I was with the kids, we would have to take like a good 5 to 10 minute walk during our session, just to keep them going. Now I fast forward to this year, and personally, it feels so much different. It feels like the kids are all here, they're really, really learning. They're just wearing masks and distancing. I think that something that's really important is the tools that we learned during the pandemic, such as Learning Ally. But by the way, I'm pregnant, so my voice gets a little shaky. I don't know why that happened. But basically, there's just been a lot of tools that I thought, the kids, they would use it during the pandemic, and then done. Learning Allies, it's basically like Audible for, let me take water.
I'll take over.
No, I can talk. Basically, it's like Audible for kids, and we did this thing called the Great Reading Games, and basically they got to read as much as they could on the app, and they were like so excited about it. And I was like, guys, we came in 137th at Prospect Hill, and they were like, this is amazing. And I thought that they wouldn't want to do it in the fall, and they're like, when are we going to do it? When are we going to do it? So things like that have really been great. I think that it's been something for our kids, especially our kids with exceptionalities, has been they come in every day and maybe they're struggling with reading or writing or math, and then on top of it, now they're having like this anxiety piece. And I think there's been a few times this year where the kids will say things like, do you think I'm going to have to quarantine? Or do you think I'm going to have to go home? And at first it was almost like, you're stuck with me, you'll have to stay. But then it became more like, we actually need to sit and talk about this. So I think that overall, like, it's been definitely a change, and the kids are, I would say, especially our kids with special needs, like, they are working so hard and they have so much extra to deal with, but I really think this year especially, like, they're coming together, and it is, I would say, overall going well.
Absolutely. I think our special needs students, over the course of the pandemic, they were the first to return back to kind of school, and that was really great. So the special classes students, they were in full time, and they were able to do that because the class sizes are smaller, so they were still able to social distance appropriately. And then there were other students that were invited in also based on their experiences and what was going on with them. So they were in person as well. Again, in the hybrid model though, but they were in person full time. And I think because of that, the academics were there. And if students were all virtual or they were in the hybrid model, students with special needs received their services that was on their IEPs. So the academics were there. They're meeting their IEP goals. I think the challenge this year that I've noticed in my building is, so now they're back full time, and all the kids are back full time. So the kids who have special needs, the environment is now a little bit different because they haven't been in this environment in quite some time when you look at that chart up there. So you're in an environment, again, of 20 plus kids, and back to some normalcy, but I think the environment's impacting their anxiety levels like you spoke about, and their ability to like follow those routines. I mean, it's hard for all of them, and I think the special needs students in that area has been a little more challenging, but we have the supports in place to kind of work with them, and we have the manpower in place to provide smaller groups and help them out there. But they do have all the services. They've had them. They'll continue to have them if they are quarantined as well, students with special needs, which is really great because they need that predictability, that consistency in order to move forward. So that's been really great for them. The social emotional learning class, I think, is just vital and is going to be so great. And the kids really it's already started in my building, and they've been really excited for those particular lessons to give them the language that they need to know that I'm okay, you're okay, and comfort as well, and that their feelings matter during this time. I also think something that we talked about, students who receive accommodations. I think during the hybrid learning, if they had like a 504 accommodation plan and they had testing accommodations, that was definitely a challenge when they were virtual. And I think families were frustrated with that too, of like, but they're supposed to get these accommodations, how that's going to happen. And that's something that that we had so many conversations about as well, because we really wanted to provide them the best that we can. And luckily through technology, I think we were able to do the best job that we could do. We had breakout rooms so you can read the test questions to them, things like that. But it took a lot of planning, but we were there. And now that it's so great that they're all back in person because those accommodations can be implemented appropriately to meet their needs as well. But I think they're doing okay. I mean, I think we have a lot of supports. The interventionists are great. The social emotional learning class is great. And I think they're able to continue with their services, whether they have to be virtual or not. And I think that was really important, that we were able to provide that for them throughout last year and this year, if they happen to be quarantined.
There's two things, positives that I think came out of the pandemic for special ed. One is the use of technology. Before the pandemic even hit, we were looking at assistive technology programs, and then once the pandemic hit, Mr. Sabalas got CAMI, which is has a lot of useful features for students with disabilities. It can read it out loud, they can highlight it, they can change font sizes, and a lot of teachers use PDFs, and that CAMI can just convert that into a text feature so that text can be read. So even with tests read at a secondary level, we could utilize technology for that. Like a student could sit at home and have a test read aloud because it's a PDF now. So instead of I talk about universal design because instead of special ed initiative of saying, okay guys, here's CAMI, we want us to use it in the classroom because it's gonna help all students, but definitely students with disabilities. Instead we went, general ed teachers were using it, and all of our students with special needs were benefiting from that. So Learning Ally has been a great feature as well at the secondary level. The ENL teachers, it's not just for students with special needs, it's reading deficits, and that is a very broad term. So students that with ENL needs can technically meet that criteria. So our ENL teachers are using it now. Before the pandemic, we were piloting it just at the middle school. And then once the pandemic hit, Learning Ally gave us free accounts for the whole district, and then we were able to continue with that. So just having all of those programs up and running and being utilized through all the teachers and throughout the buildings, our students with special needs have definitely benefited from that. The other benefit, I would say, or the positive, and we talked a lot about collaboration, but I think our co-teachers had to really be creative with the way that they were planning lessons during virtual instruction, then hybrid instruction, and now back in. So I think that our collaboration between our co-teachers has been excellent, and they continue to be, and I've definitely seen more innovative lesson planning, more time talking about how to engage the students, and I know all three middle school, high school teachers are co-teachers as well, and we see the differences that it's not just about, okay, well here are the special ed students, the general ed students. All the students have different needs, and they're forming groups differently. They're planning lessons differently to support all the students in those classes.
I think just being back in person, and particularly being a co-teacher and actually being able to monitor the room and walk around and see student work, it's just so much more beneficial for myself as the teacher to be able to see where the students actually are, as opposed to being behind a screen and having to check in, whether it's via GoGuardian or asking a question in some sort of breakout room. I think it is much more telling, and you're actually able to have a conversation with a student in the moment about what's actually happening. And so for me, that's been huge. I think that's been a really awesome plus to being back in schools. And then just another anecdotal piece in terms of something that I've noticed a huge increase in students with special needs that have been coming to my academy periods. And it has been amazing to see that, because that's typically where we see a much lower attendance rate is for our students in these co-taught classes coming to academy. And I'm not entirely sure what this is that's causing this, but it's amazing to see. And there isn't that apprehension or this fear of coming to academy and having these conversations about something they're not sure of. And it's amazing to see this increase. And that's just something that I wanted to point out. And I really can't tell you what the reason is behind that, but I do notice it, and it's apparent. So that's awesome to see.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. I spoke to Garrett about that. I thought they just loved me. I was like, oh my God, my academy is so so popular. And then he's like, my academy, like with the co-taught students. And I was like, oh, so they're just happy to have an adult that they can get help from. So I thought it was special. He crushed my dreams.
I'm sure they like you. Well, they're craving, I think, that interaction.
Yes.
You know, they want to interact with you, they want to have a conversation with you, because last year it was a little bit harder to have those one-on-one interactions, so they're really craving it, and it's nice. I mean, that's the whole reason why we're teachers. We love working with students, so being able to interact with them like face to face like that on a daily basis is really what we want to do.
And just one other thing I wanted to add in terms of students with special needs. One of the things, me personally, I'm so excited is that we're getting back to some of the work that was kind of on pause for other parts of the pandemic. And I was just thinking back to our first week of school when we were meeting with we started a pilot of integrated co-teaching in elementary, which has been something we've been talking about for years. And we were talking to the coach, and I was so excited. I'm like, I'm just so happy to be having a conversation about instruction and not COVID. Like, this is fantastic. So I'm really excited that we're getting back to that work, and seeing it in action is something we've talked about for years, is really exciting and is only going to benefit kids with special needs going forward.
I'd like to wrap up the last two questions kind of together because I want to hear your feedback, and also, and so does the board. What are some predictions you have for the next iteration, or what happens the rest of the school year and beyond? And then also, what are some ways that the school board and the school system can continue to support teachers and administrators as the pandemic moves forward?
Well, I think we've kind of touched on everything. You know, I think Dr. Fitzgerald said that there was a lot of positives that came out of this. And I know you might not see it like that, Dr. Garcia, but it's full.
But you know what?
Not
I'm
empty.
a learner, and I'm enlightened. How's that?
Okay, so I think that at the elementary level, we became really good at using technology and learning from one another. The younger teachers really taught the more seasoned teachers how to make Google slide presentations, how to do voiceovers so that your children at home were hearing your voices. Now, I'm hoping that we don't have to use that, but I know how to do all. Wait, should I admit that? I know how to do things that I never thought I would be able to do before. So going forward, we have to find a way to use some of those great technologies like Flipgrid and Kahoot and making Google slide presentations, how to incorporate them into your regular instruction, but minimizing screen time so that the children aren't becoming, married to the computers. And I think what we learned is that these young children, and I can speak at the elementary level, need us more than they need their computers, and they do better with us and with their peers than they do on the computer. But I think they have a place in our classrooms, and we have to learn how to find that balance going forward. So we have Ms. Del Nostro and Mr. Sabalos, who have been incredible. Thank you so much. Every time I have a question, it gets answered. If I want training, if I want them to show me how to do something, they're there. And so that going forward, I know that will continue. But that's just one piece of it.
I think one of the things the board can do, which I think is critical, is to protect those PLC times.
Yeah.
They're back in our schedule and our calendars, and I think those are critical for the planning time for the teachers, for the administrators. So that's something I would ask that you, if there's a way to do that, protect that time.
Yes, I would.
Aside from interventionists, but.
I would echo the protecting planning time. I know right now, fourth grade in my school is working hard to implement the new Science 21 curriculum. And so we're trained on the curriculum, and then sometimes within 24 hours, we're turning that training around into our classroom. So really protecting that planning time so that way we can implement that new curriculum at a high level, and also all of the other new components in our curriculums, our TC curriculums and so forth. There are new components that we're working with and that we're learning. So we really do need as much planning time to do that
as well as to incorporate the technology that we've learned and we've become more well-versed in, but we want to become even more well-versed, and we need that time to incorporate those things. And planning time is the time that we do that type of planning.
The PLC is an early dismissal.
Yes.
So this is trying to answer one of the questions I asked last spring, which was, what are we taking out of the COVID period, that we can actively use and, to make our district go forward in our educational endeavors. And so you've answered that to a certain extent. You have to own your geezership.
Wait, I was your son Nick's student teacher in 1994. How is he?
You survived.
So that's how old I am.
He's got 3 kids of his own.
Oh,
Thanks for telling me
God.
that.
I taught in AP European history.
I taught Garrett in 9th grade. He's right next to me.
This is like a group confessional.
So I own it. I'm very proud.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
But I'm really happy to hear that there were some definitely positive things that came out of the experience, because it's something we all suffered through, and better collaboration, embracing technology, and carrying that forward, I think, is the challenge, right?
Utilize, not using technology to replace teaching.
No, I understand what you're
Right.
saying. I definitely
So-
understand what you're saying.
But
But
using
it's-
it wisely and,
know.
and purposefully.
And not being afraid to search out new products and new techniques. I remember when we first started getting computers here, and the whole battle was just to get the teachers to use them. It really was. And, that's a long time ago. So, anyway, thank you.
I also think that beyond the technology, or if I look at the high school teachers, prior to the pandemic, we were exploring the inquiry cycle. We were exploring the concept of assessing during class, formative assessments, and not everything has to be a summative assessment that's like a test. We were working on performance-based assessments. What the pandemic did for our high school staff, from my perspective, is it really opened up a whole new world of process, and how process can be actually more valuable than product, because we had to shift our assessment, as Dr. Callahan said. And so process, which was always important, but it might not necessarily have counted as much. Now what you see are teachers really talking about how valuable that process is for students, and different iterations of process and questioning and revising, which is the inquiry cycle. So, I think that we're sort of picking up where we left off, and I think it's actually set us up, at least in terms of mindset, in a pretty good place.
One theme I heard quite a bit tonight is about like this notion of flexibility. Obviously, it's a hard lesson we've all had to learn over the last almost 2 years now. And one place where I saw a lot of flexibility last year was in some of the grading practices. Are there any of those still in place? Like any lessons learned in terms of, dropping the lowest score, those kinds of things that are still in place, which we used last year because of the conditions of last year?
So I think it depends upon the level that you look at, and the discipline. I will say, for instance, in secondary English, revision is much more important now than it was pre-pandemic at the highest levels of English classes. So the teachers really, I think, now are interested in having students revise as much as possible and giving real-time feedback on the revision. So that is in my opinion, very flexible assessing, because the students are learning through each revision.
Yeah, and I think there's more flexibility with that. You know, it's not, oh, if you don't turn it in by this date, you know, we don't want it. It's more important that they do those revisions and they go through that process. And it's also building stamina when they're doing that. Go back, this is what I want, this is what I want to see. And then the students doing that. So they see benefit because they see a better grade. It's helping with their stamina. And they're doing more of the work as opposed to, all right, well, I'm not going to get credit, I'm not handing that in. That's never good.
I think I'm coming off one of them today, but also last week and actually, a few weeks ago as well, is I've had some of the best meetings with my departments that I think I've ever had. And I think that's because people have done so much work to try to figure this out and problem solve that they're sincerely, they sincerely appreciate the opportunity to collaborate and that flexibility that people are bringing up. They're bringing it to their work. So I had a math meeting today, and we've done a tremendous amount of work, K-12 of mathematics, even repacing where we're teaching everything. We had a tremendous group of elementary teachers for each grade this summer do pacing work, and to Ian's point earlier, we had to push that out. We pushed it all out in a grade level meeting, and that's how everybody in the district knew what was done in the summer. But we just came off a math meeting where we were talking about, potential electives in the future that harness some of the things we've learned in the pandemic to make mathematics a little bit more real world. So we're looking at some of those things. We were talking about interventions. Last week, with the science department, we were doing really a lot of the same work. So some of the most inspirational meetings that I've had, really K-12, have been within the pandemic itself and then also post-pandemic. And probably, and I've got to give the special ed teachers a shout out here too, because they've become an integral part of what we do, K-12. But delivering an IEP or a 504 plan over a computer, you should try to figure that out. And the special educators did that. And it took a tremendous amount of effort to try to even track some kids down when they were having issues over computers. But I mean, just coming back and having some of our special educators join us in the math and science department meetings to bring their perspectives to things. I think the last 2 months of just our meetings have been some of the most inspirational for me to listen to. So we did a lot of work. We actually moved around some of the things in geometry to just make geometry more palatable at the beginning of the year so that we didn't hit them with proofs right away. We built up some math confidence and then eased our way into proofs. And we thought that was a really important thing to marry with our social emotional work that we were doing. So there's those kinds of efforts, I think, are a direct result of a very bad time that we made the best of and learned a lot from. So I think some of the, and I'm always inspired by our teachers, but now more so than ever, some of the conversations that they have, some of the, just the fact, it's very, very, like I said, inspiring. It's always about the kid. And like, how do I get the kid to learn? And sometimes that means, just giving them a kind word about how they're, persevering through a math problem. And sometimes it's staying after school and, adding an extra half hour to your academy to make sure kids pick up the concepts that they're missing out on. So it's been a very positive time to see that kind of work being done. And, it didn't surprise me, but it did inspire me. So that's been really cool.
Every generation is dealt with a certain experience, right? So on December 7th, 1941, that generation, everyone knew where they were, when they heard it happen, how it impacted lives, obviously leading to a war. And then, you hear about when people talked about where they were, what they were doing when John F. Kennedy was assassinated, or when men, landed on the moon, or 9/11, and that day. And those were kind of one-day experiences that had lasting effects. And now we're living through the pandemic, which is, some people say, according to people who passed away each day, another 9/11 over numerous months. if you think about now how that impacts our lives outside of education and how we're dealing with it, you can only imagine then children and the lasting impacts it will have on them, which is the unknown. And I think that as long as we keep on talking about it, sharing those stories, trying to meet those challenges with new solutions, I think that, you know, we will help children along. You know, one thing that came out of the pandemic and that I heard today, a few things, is about different environments for kids, right? And I think now back to this slide. The classroom furniture looks different. If they need a break, they need to move. You know, I hear about the use of time in schedules, how we've adapted that to provide more learning time for the teachers and different experiences. Really with the final experience of trying to make experiences more authentic and relevant. I think the children have experienced a whole authentic, relevant time period every single day for the past 18 months, 19 months. So, you know, they're experiencing that with us. But one thing that's definitely new, and this will lead to the next work session, I think, is at the forefront, right, the social emotional learning piece, which is, we kind of contend is that umbrella. When we look at the strategic plan, now you have authentic learning and also cultural competency kind of that grows from it. But are kids feeling safe? Are they healthy? Are the adults safe and healthy as well? I think that's a lesson that I've definitely learned over the past 20 months. So we're hoping that tonight you're able to get some insight in how it's been for us as a community. And it is very inspiring to be here with the leaders and the teachers who make it happen every day. So I want to thank you for coming and sharing your stories with us.
Thank you. Very good.
So with that, thank you. I'm sure we'll engage again in the future, but I know the next work session will look at the other umbrella topic of social emotional.
Dr. Garcia, thank you so much for facilitating. This was amazing. To our directors, our principals, our supervisors, our amazing faculty. You made it sound so good, I'd almost want to go through it again. But, no, I just honestly, I could not be more proud. And just the way that people, I just said, the collaboration that preceded all of this, I think was so much of the foundation that then really brought us through it together. And as hard as it was, I think you've highlighted so many ways in which it's actually made us more flexible and in a lot of ways probably even better at the craft that we do. Very intentional, I heard that word a lot of intentionality. And I'm excited about our kids and the benefits that they are getting from the work that each of you do each day. So thank you incredibly for that. Thank you for being here and being willing to share that with the board tonight. Okay.
Okay, Leah, do I have a motion to?
I have one quick question. Because you mentioned the district committees are going to be announced.
Hopefully on Monday, we'll be able to start getting word out to people. We'll have it wrapped up by the end of the week.
And several people have asked me how the decisions are made.
Sure.
Could
So
you just explain?
each year, the board leadership and the superintendent make the decisions. And we consider a few different categories consistently in the years that I've been involved in terms of previous commitment to that committee, any previous experience in terms of service in the district, professional expertise relevant to the committee that they're applying to, quality of the application. And we try where possible to consider having some representation across the district where it's possible. You know, if you have an applicant pool, just to make sure that we have all the schools represented where we can.
And will other board members have the opportunity to have any input before that's announced?
Typically, that's not how the process has been before. Okay. Leah. do a
Yes,
motion.
before I make my motion to adjourn, I wanted to say thank you. I remember, Steve, you and I have a little bit of a different perspective on life, I think, but I remember you sitting in your car during board meetings and I was in my bed, and I'm very grateful, as comfortable as that was, that we're all
That's when
here.
we lost power. Yeah, that was
Yes,
fun.
you were
That's right.
sitting in your car.
I was stealing someone else's Wi-Fi.
Yeah. So I have a very vivid recollection of that time, and I'm very grateful to be here in person with everybody. It feels wonderful to be in this room together. A couple things really struck me from this meeting, and one of them was the foundation. It seems to me that there is a foundational need for our students to be attended to emotionally and socially. And that seemed very important before the pandemic, but now it's been articulated almost by everyone in this room. So I just wanted to reiterate that, because that seems to me, like you said, students can't learn unless they are there socially and emotionally. So thank you all for recognizing that and saying that today. I also really appreciate, to reflect what you said, the innovation that came out of this time period. Some great ideas and the collaboration. It's very exciting to be back here with all of you, so thank you. With that, Madam President,
Well,
would
do
you...
others have any recap on tonight's work session?
Anybody
I thought
else?
that's
Sorry.
I'll just say, my daughter is one of the ones at the bottom of that list that has a lot of nevers there. And we were in the van the other day and she said, "Daddy, I'm so happy I'm going to real school." So I just thank all of our educational heroes. My heart goes out to you. Thank you for everything you've done for the students in this district.
I never miss an opportunity to make comment. You guys have reinvented our educational system 3 times. First to go virtual, then to go hybrid, and then to come back in the classroom after all that. So I think that's a tremendous, it's mind-boggling, really.
4 times if you include with barriers and then without barriers.
Okay.
With 3 feet of
No,
distance.
not splitting hairs, but yeah, at least 3 times, possibly 4 times. So it's a tremendous achievement. So I want to congratulate the leadership and every teacher that's been part of that.
I did want to say that it was exhausting. Like in June, Colonial families came out the last day of school. It was such a beautiful thing. I could cry again just thinking about it. We went into the building, we were sobbing. We were emotionally, I don't want to say traumatized because that's an overused word, but just keep us in mind. Don't forget, you just use the word heroes, and sometimes teachers are vilified. We're not doing enough, and we're sitting there going, we're exhausted. And so we're really excited to get back to normal this year. And so we really want to get our feet on solid ground before the earth shakes again. So hopefully it won't. So I was hanging out with you too much that but please don't forget that.
Well, that's why it's so wonderful to have you guys here tonight, because that was the thought that I had going through my mind is, we get to see the administrators a lot, but we don't get to see the teachers other than those that we interface for our own children and our own families. But it's so wonderful to see you guys here smiling. Like, I think the engagement is really important for us. I can tell that it's really important to you with your colleagues, and that there's a lot of excitement, and I'm happy to see you guys are doing okay, because I've personally been very worried about how you guys have been holding up, and I know it's been a trying experience, so we thank you. Okay.
Madam
Leah.
President, would you entertain a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thanks, Benny. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Good night. Thank you guys so
Thank you
much.
very much.
Thank you.